that gives people something to talk to you about because they understand exactly what you're posting about. And then I guarantee you, if you get no responses normally and you say, I'm trying to figure out how to make this tree look better, instead of just posting a forest and saying sneak peek of my game, people will respond and tell you what they think of the tree.
Yeah.
As silly as that sounds, but I mean, it really, you have to remember it's a community. You should treat them sort of like friends or like classmates or however you want to think about it. And you go in and if you want a reaction, you should ask for that reaction. Kind of like, I need feedback on this thing. Please,
Yeah.
can you give me feedback on this thing? And that stuff really helps, I think.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense too to really tailor that post because you're right. I see that all the time too, where people are like, "Hey, how is this?" And we're like, "Well, how's what?" I mean, it's basically kind of the interaction that happens, and then it kind of drops, or there's just no interaction, right? And it's funny. I don't know why this. I mean, it's relevant. It came to mind as you were saying it, but I remember. In my college years, I was taking a course on documentary filmmaking. And one thing that I learned that was really important was like, part of the art of creating documentaries or just interviews in general is really structuring your questions to get the response that you want. That's why when you're watching like reality TV shows and stuff or anything along that line, that's why you're like, wow, it's like it was perfectly set up and well, yes, it was, but
yeah, exactly.
But taking that like with that example and obviously the one you provided, I mean that's essentially what you need to do is really tailor those things so you can get their reaction because people don't have the same insight that you do to your game, especially if they're seeing it for the first time. So whether it's an image or a video, if you're not really necessarily showing that information or at least providing some context to it, then their guess is as good as anybody else's.
Yeah, exactly. And if they don't know, then it's so easy to just move on to the next thing, and that's why a lot of stuff gets skipped over, I think. And it's tough, but it's important. It's really important, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and I guess to go. I mean, and then different communities are a little different, but it's all about experimenting, and so. I think the one last thing, and I'm sure you've talked about it a ton, just in general about marketing games and indie games, is don't ever think that like one post is going to be some monster post. It's like assume that every post is going to get like 10 likes, but you have to post, every week. And then that gives you the opportunity to try to speak differently to different posts and see how people respond based on your game and based on your own language and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I always like to lead in with like whether it's yourself or anybody you're working with, like go in with like under promising, over deliver type stuff. So if you're thinking about like, because if you go in with that mindset too, it's like my goal. Let's say my initial goal is to hit this, just basic whatever. But then if it does really well, that's all gravy. It's all great, and then you learn from that and move on. So.
Yeah, totally.
Sweet.
Absolutely.
All right. So you touched upon a few things earlier, and I kind of want to shift direction in that vein, which is like, how to respect and create value for the greater community. And when I say greater community, essentially it's going outside of your own community and, and interacting with all these other communities like we talked about with Reddit. So I want to lead this discussion off with like how important is providing great content to people, and what are some examples of what you think that could be?
I mean, I think it's super important to have good content. I think everything that you post or put out should be entertaining on some level and should be appealing on some level. Otherwise, again, people are going to move right past it. I think, from like my quick posts on the weekends, I try to, those videos take longer than they should because I'm trying to make sure that they're really nice and appealing. And that's part of my animation brain working and wanting, things to feel good and look nice and stuff like that. But it's important because you want to catch people's eye every single time. But I also think, like with the YouTube stuff, it's important to have good content because, I'm trying to share some knowledge because actually, it's like a little bit of giving back. It's like, Unreal forums and Unreal itself gives an opportunity to game developers like me that literally wouldn't exist without them. Like I can't make an engine. I can only like work with their engine to make this game. So it's important to me that there's some kind of giving back, but also, I mean, I would be lying if I said it doesn't bring people to me also. People look to find how to do a thing. They find my video and then they find my game, because I use my game as the medium that I talk about, my talks with. And, but yeah, I think if you're posting something that isn't good content, then it's probably not a good post. But what good content is like pretty hard to define.
Yeah.
But
yeah. And a way I like to try to look at it too is something that showcases the game in the best light possible. So don't just take a screenshot real quick and be like, oh, I got it. Because that, again, what we talked about before, might not provide the best context or the best representation of that. It might look really funny, or from that angle, something weird could be going on that people are like questioning. And well, you don't want that to be the first impression someone has when they're looking at your game.
Yeah, exactly. People will never have the context you have, and and non-developers generally will misinterpret like white box art or anything that's temporary or prototypey. So you have to either say hey, this is just a prototype, or something. Like, you have to tell them. But yeah, they're gonna assume it's a full finished game almost with every post, and so you should really show everything, like you said, in the best light at all times. Which kind of goes, it's the reverse of what we just talked about, which is like, you got to post a ton and not expect any one of them to take off, but you should post every one of them hoping and giving it the best chance it could have to take off.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Awesome. There's one thing I want to talk about too, that I think it was a focus point in your video that I mentioned earlier. And it's basically, and I'll just come out and say, I just absolutely love this concept and live by it myself. Show, don't tell. But sometimes showing and telling can be fairly similar in nature, or at least can be interpreted that way. So what do you think is a good way to differentiate the two, and why is showing more compelling to people than the telling?
So I think I can't remember what exactly I was talking about. So, but for myself, and you saw, I experienced this just in the talk when I was trying to describe the game. The description of my game can sound, and often sounds like, a super generic side-scrolling fighter. It's like, oh yeah, you got a Viking swinging an axe and a side-scroller. Great, I've never seen that before. But if I show people one GIF, they will go, oh, got it, awesome. Like, I'm in. Now I understand what you're saying. And so I just generally find that, picture says is worth 1,000 words or whatever, and a GIF is worth 10 times that. Because, it's like, how much can I describe in one sentence that a video can't do? It's almost impossible. Right. And so I will tell people what to focus on in a video, kind of like we've talked about before. And I think, like you're saying, those things kind of cross. It's like, look at this thing, I just worked on it. It's better now. And then they look at it, and they not only do they see that the axe is on fire today, and it wasn't yesterday, but they see the lighting, they see the new enemy that I didn't mention, they see the new environment that I haven't shown yet. They still focus on the fire axe, but they're consuming all of this extra information that you never want to see in a post. It's like, look at these rocks, they're very cool, and the goblin now has a helmet on. It's like, but they just consume that. That just is knowledge to them by watching the video. So
okay, I'm going to drill you a little bit further here, though, okay? Because I think that was a good example in terms of just really showcasing just strong video and kind of letting the video speak for itself. But let's apply that same concept to either video or just imagery as a whole. Do you ever feel that in some cases, like screenshots or video can tell more than showing more?
I mean, are those the same thing? I mean, I think that depends on what you mean by showing and telling in those cases. I think, the videos, I'm always trying to give information to people, whether that's, my game has fire axes or something, or this is the style of the game, or here's a little sneak of the story or whatever it is. And in theory, I'm telling them that, but I'm telling them through the visuals. So to me, that means showing. And it's a mentality that's in the game also. I don't have a ton of dialogue. I'm showing you a lot of the events that are happening just in the environment, so, environmental storytelling and stuff. And so it's sort of like a mantra, not only for the marketing side of things, but it's actually like the development is the same. I don't know if I'm answering.
No, it's right. And and I realize in retrospect now too. I mean, and clearly I'm putting you on the spot here with this one. But you make a good point too, though, about like that there's really not much dialogue there. So like by design, your game is already doing a whole lot of showing. But sometimes I see, unless it's directed in intentional, but when people will, let's say, tell a little bit more with their imagery, it could just be simply like, oh, here's a tutorial or dialogue boxes and stuff. And obviously they all have their place and everything too. But sometimes, and I think it's just where I was thinking of too, it just kind of goes back again to the point we were making before with just showcasing your best work, because and it goes back to like mentality. Don't just I know it's an interesting concept, but don't just tell something through an image because you got the image and now you can slap it and throw it out there. Show something in terms of, again, what's the best representation and idea and concept behind your game, so people can really get that understanding at first. Opposed to not implying what that is and what that experience is like. I think that's what it really comes down to, is the experience. And again, like your game itself is very like experience oriented. I mean, your mindset, your strengths, and everything else is all driven by those things. So again, like what we were talking about earlier before the show too, it's like just naturally these things become apparent for you, but for others, because the amount of experience that you have, but for others it might not necessarily be the case, and it's just something they have to learn.
Yeah, that's definitely one of those things. Is like I try not to take for granted my, this is my first indie game, but I've made tons of games and I've watched people do all of these different roles, and I've always try to pay attention to the sort of stuff we're talking about, just out of pure interest for myself. What are they saying about their game? What is the design of this game and why do people like it? It's super interesting to me. And this is a tangent, I guess, but it's like observation and practice and stuff. Like it matters, and I'm super lucky to be here now because of long time of preparation for this moment, kind of. It's not an overnight, thing. Sorry, totally. That was a massive tangent.
No, that's all right. That's all right. Yeah, I mean, but it's true though. It's absolutely true. All right, and another thing I want to ask before we start wrapping up is the idea of respecting your community seems pretty obvious, right? But there's probably lots of instances where devs may not realize that they're not respecting their community. So with that said, what are some missed opportunities for devs when it comes to respecting others in their community?
Missed opportunities. That's a tough one. I think in general, especially, I mean, with any part of the community, your most sort of loyal fan and your sort of on fringe, I'm just here because person, they all are potential, how do I want to say this? everyone's opinion should matter to you because those are opinions of real people. And